Hello, and welcome back to the Nashville Predators Farm Green Adidas away jersey Quest franchise mode. Excuse me, sorry. As you see here at the end, kind of the beginning of the free agency period-ish after the 2023-24 season. So this video, I'm going to recap what happened in the 2023-24 season and then the major changes that have been made in this offseason, because as Anakin said in Revenge of the Sith, this is where the fun begins. We made a lot of changes. I don't say a ton of changes, but I made some significant changes this offseason, and we'll probably continue to do so more frequently in the seasons to come. So the roster's really going to be changed and shaped and molded more than it kind of was in these initial couple of seasons where I was just kind of like keeping things the same and seeing what would happen. I now kind of expecting greater and bigger things from this roster during the regular season and the playoffs, so hopefully we can win the Stanley Cup in this Jersey Quest friendship mode. As you can see here, it says Stanley Cup champions Colorado Avalanche, so obviously we didn't win the Stanley Cup. That's why we're in the free agency period. So let's kind of get into how the season went down. In terms of the regular season, we finished with a 43, 35, and 4 record, which was good for 90 points. And once again, we were the first wild card in the Western Conference after finishing 4th in the Central Division for the 3rd season in a row. But this season was a lot tighter, a little scarier than the rest. It wasn't really like as much of a foregone conclusion that we were going to be making the playoffs for a lot of the season. We started off pretty well. Then kind of the middle portion-ish of the season, we got hit with a lot of injuries to defensemen for the most part, which kind of screwed things up. We kind of took a nosedive. We're under 500 for a little bit, and then kind of bounced, and we're a little bit closer to 500, and we're kind of pretty much around 500 for like most of the middle part of the season. But then trade deadline happens. After the trade deadline, I think it's like the first, second game after that I played. Let me check. My doodad here. Oh, it's not in here. Yeah, but after, like, pretty much right after the trade deadline, I think we played like a game. I won that game, and then that kind of kicked us on, and we had a pretty good end to the season, especially like the last like 7 games. We won like 6 of the last 7 games of the regular season, which kind of pushed us barely, as you kind of see, into the playoffs, into this 4th spot in the Central, first wild card in the West. So that was good. We made the playoffs again, which is kind of, it was a little tougher. It's kind of what I was expecting from us, like the past couple of seasons, was more of like us kind of struggling and barely making the playoffs if we were going to make it at all, which is kind of what happened here. Looking at kind of more like the scoring on, I see Phil Forsberg here finished with 90 points, which was 36 goals, 54 assists, and that was good for 10, 9, 8th in terms of the top 10 scorers in the NHL. He finished 8th with 90 points. Top scorer was once again Alex Ovechkin with 102 points this time, and then 10th was Patrick Laine of the Blue Jackets with 89 points. In terms of the broader NHL, let's go to the awards, kind of check that kind of out. Stanley Cup, as we already said, was that. President's Trophy this season was kind of surprised. The Columbus Blue Jackets, they were on fire most of the regular season, finished with 113 points, which is pretty decent. In terms of Jeremy Davies, kind of skipped over his stats, so I'll just read them to you. He scored 18 points in total, 4 goals, 14 assists, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So around a third of those points came from me playing games with him against our like kind of rivals in this Jersey Quest franchise mode. Kind of then looking at kind of the playoffs. We'll go to the playoffs next before we do kind of the more awards in general. Playoffs, as you can see, we got matched up against the St. Louis Blues, the winners of the Central Division. The winners of the Central Division with 97 points. As you can see here, we lost in 6 games. Kind of, those are all simulated. Kind of going over the results in a little more detail. Game 1, St. Louis won 3-4. Game 2, 6-3 Nashville. Game 3, 3-4 St. Louis. Game 4, 2-4 St. Louis. Game 5, we won 4-3. And then Game 6, we lost 2-3 to St. Louis. I'm pretty sure a couple of those games, the second 3-4 game and then the 2-3 game loss in Game 6 were both overtime losses, so the series could have easily gone either way in terms of who advanced, who didn't. But unfortunately, we didn't advance. As you can see here, Colorado won the Stanley Cup in a sweep against the Ottawa Senators. So our kind of streak for the first 2 seasons, us losing to the eventual Stanley Cup champion, ended this year as St. Louis lost the second round to Colorado. Kind of looking at the awards. So that kind of bears that here. Campbell Bowl, Avalanche, Prince of Wales Trophy was the Senators. We're going to the individual awards again. It was kind of the Alex Ovechkin show for the most part, with Ovechkin winning the Art Ross. TJ Oshie, who finished 4th in scoring with 97 points, picked up the Hart. John Carlson picked up the James Norris. As you guys see, the Capitals kind of swept the awards, but they actually. Yeah, they did pretty good. They were 2 points behind Columbus for the President's Trophy with 111 points. So John Carlson picked up the Norris. Lady Byng was Johnny Gaudreau, as I kind of mentioned earlier. I'm pretty sure. No, I didn't know. He finished 9th in scoring with 90 points. Picked up the Lady Byng. Calder was Connor Bedard. The Boston Bruins with 56 points. Again, like the first season, this is a case where the top rookie scorer didn't win the Calder. The top rookie scorer was Shane Wright with the Kraken with 64 points, but Bedard won Calder with the trophy this season. Conn Smythe, Gabriel Landeskog of the Avalanche, so the first time this franchise was that the Conn Smythe didn't go to a goalie. So he must have had a pretty decent point total in the playoffs. The Vezina, Igor Shesterkin. The Jennings, kind of so probably surprised that there is such a dominant record, was the 2 Blue Jackets goalies, which is Tristan Jarry and James Reimer. Masterson skipped that over. Jack Adams went to the Wilds coach for whatever reason, because they were the 5th in the Central, 2nd wild card with 89 points, which is worse than they finished last season, where they were also the 2nd wild card but had 91 points. So I don't quite get what criteria the game uses to decide who wins the Jack Adams, because it's not really that impressive of a coaching performance. The Selke once again got to Ryan O'Reilly. Ted Lindsay went to TJ Oshie, so surprisingly. And then, not a surprise at all, the Rocket Richard went to Ovechkin. Again, that's kind of the playoffs and whatnot. So in terms of Jeremy Davies in the playoffs, in the 6 games series, once again, 0 goals, 0 assists, 0 points. But now, kind of going into the draft and off-season business, we'll go to the draft first. That happens first. Had a pretty excellent draft, I would say. Kind of for the 3rd season in a row, our 1st round pick was 20th overall. Using out kind of the season forward, pretty much all like the prospects are computer generated, like game generated guys. So we picked up a center, top 6 medium potential. 2nd round we picked up a right winger, top 6 low potential. 3rd round I kind of went off the board because like it was like the best player available. Picked a goalie, elite medium potential, so we have 3 really good goalies in our prospect pool, so hopefully at least 2 of them actually hit the heights of their potential. Sorry. I could kind of become part of the NHL roster at some point. You could probably trade this 3rd one. Next up, at 121st, we picked a right wing, top 9 low. And then last 3 picks were 165th, which is the left. We picked a top 6 low left wing, 212th. Top 6 low right defenseman, and 217th, top 6 low left defenseman. Kind of once again at the draft, we were wheeling and dealing. Kind of starting with our 4th round pick, because there wasn't really anyone around there that was like scouted well enough that like had a good potential that I wanted to bring in. So I dealt our 4th round pick. So we started out going into the draft with 2 4ths, 2 5ths, 4 6th, and 5 7th round picks. I then traded one of the 4ths, 3 5th round picks, because we got one on the trade. And then, 1, 2, 3, 4 6th round picks. and then 5 7th round picks for various picks in other drafts. So kind of once again, we're probably going to have a ton of picks in the 2025 draft if we get to that point. Hopefully we don't, because we win the Stanley Cup. But we'll have a bunch of like late round picks again that'll probably end up again, once again, wheeling and dealing for picks in other drafts and whatnot. But now kind of comes where the big changes happened after this season. Our original kind of coach that we got at the beginning, his contract expired, along with pretty much the entire NHL coaching staff, and I let them all walk into free agency. Let's see here. Here he is, our ex-coach. Still has not been hired, which is kind of funny. Sylvain Gamache. Why we fired him was their ski fit was terrible. Didn't fit with like any of our players that well at all. So what I did is kind of went in. This is kind of like I was honestly initially considering when I kind of was looking at the coaches available and whatnot, and kind of doing some research online because this is an EA Sports game, and all EA Sports seems to care about is the online modes where you can pay money to open digital card packs and grind and pay to win and all that garbage. That's the modes they care about. So these single player offline modes like franchise mode kind of get neglected. From kind of what I was reading online, as if you remember, so like you can't see it now. If I go like and look, like highlight Jeremy Davies in like the kind of contract screen because it's the off season and we have a new coach and all that jazz. His player preferences for kind of the scheme fit on the lines, or I guess pairings. He's a defenseman. His scheme fit was pinch and then cycle for the two kind of things. And from what I was kind of reading online, that seems to be, I guess it was like one Reddit post, so who's to say like my experience, that person's experience, like are the norm and not the minority. But pinch cycle seems to be basically like non-existent, like is very rare to find on coaches in general, and then essentially non-existent on the third pairing for coaches. So if you remember, Jeremy Davies is like a 76 overall, 7th defenseman potential player. So I was kind of like, at that point, I was like, ugh, that's kind of like really annoying. This looks like basically never going to find a coach that fits with him. And then that means like this season I had to hire like a temp coach, which I initially was going to do by like the top coach was like an A overall or whatever. I offered him like a 1-year contract just to see maybe we'll go through this kind of one season with him and know like additional staff, and then kind of hopefully maybe fingers crossed we will get maybe a second pair, a coach with a pinch cycle thing on his second pairing, which I couldn't find at all. But then I was kind of like, you know what? As Anakin said, this is where the fun begins. Screw it. We're going to try something kind of bananas here. And here our new head coach is Norm Simmons, A- coach with a really good teaching stat, good offensive stat, good defensive power play, and then kind of schmeh coach influence penalty kill. But A- overall, those stats are pretty good. He's a generalist coach, which is pretty decent. Signed to a 4-year contract with a $2.343 million a year salary. And then, but kind of looking here at coaching record, I guess he was a Stanley Cup champion with one of these other teams, and they let him go, I guess. With that, I don't know which team that was, to be quite honest with you, but he won a Stanley Cup with either let's go back and look at my records here. He won the Stanley Cup either with the Canucks season 1, the Sharks season 2, or the Avalanche season 3. I would imagine likely the Canucks, because I'm guessing most of the coaches at the start probably had like 3-year contracts, like the one we kind of were given at the beginning had. So like his contract probably expired, and the Canucks, I guess, because they kept getting down to the playoffs after that first season, didn't rehire him. But whatever. Moving on from that. As you can see here, his team fit percentage right now says 53%, but also is only showing like what 8 players of like a 20-man NHL roster. So that's why the scheme fit's kind of low. But as you can kind of see here, in general, the bars are pretty decent for a lot of these players. So when you kind of go down here, not this, he's a balanced coach, whatever. Here, his lines, like his scheme fit kind of stuff. The first thing, the line strategies, is like a thing you can't really just look at initially by looking at the player, like at the right stick press thing. You have to actually look at like in the line, editing the line screen. So that one I don't really care too much about in terms of the scheme fit. Especially because it has a much smaller influence on the scheme fit than these other 4 things here: the carry dump bias, the cycle shoot bias, the efficiency energy bias, and the don't block shots bias. As you kind of see here, a lot of it's balanced. As the second line and the fourth line is like all balanced, bounce. So what that basically kind of means for that is that like pretty much any player in the game will be like at least a 0 line score on those lines, because pretty much no matter what, like even if you're like, say like the person here was like, it's a hypothetical forward, I was gonna try to put my second line was like carry, shoot, efficiency, don't block, because bounce is like the middle option. Even though none of them like actually line up, they just be kind of like a yellow dash, which is a 0 kind of for the line score. So that's kind of really good. First, so like the second and fourth line, I could chuck anyone on there as long as they're overall decent enough, and they'll do a job. The 0 line score, which is obviously you want like positive line scores, but like 0, like it means pretty much like the line chemistry scores are never going to go below 0, because you can't really possibly do that. But as you kind of see on the defense pair 1, the preferences for the first defensive pair are pinch and cycle, which is what Jeremy Davies' potential preferences are. So what's kind of happening now in this next season is that Jeremy Davies is going to be our first line left defenseman, first pairing left defenseman. So what that kind of meant is we had to make some kind of changes in our defense in terms of personnel. Also because part of the reason why I was initially was considering calling this like a failure and ending the series here was because we had like no cap space going into the off season, and initially if we had kind of stuck with the players I'd re-signed to new contracts and whatnot, we were going to need a third line left winger, fourth line center, backup goalie, and potentially a like third pairing right defenseman. And we had like, I think maybe like $2 million in cap space to sign like those 3 or 4 players, which is not going to happen in like any known universe in this game, because like especially because defensemen are like ridiculously expensive pretty much no matter what. Overall, they're like going to be like at least like $1 million or $2 AAV on their contracts. So kind of with this now that I had like this kind of this coach's scheme written out here, I had like actually like wrote it down like on a piece of paper and had like in my spreadsheet when I initially started the franchise mode, kind of the players who've been here from the beginning on the NHL roster. I typed up their kind of scheme fit preferences in a Google Sheets kind of spreadsheet situation. So basically what I did was I hired, once this coach actually accepted my offer, which is pretty surprising, because most of the time in this game you offer like a head coach a contract just kind of blindly, and most of the time they'll be like, oh, like like your market size or your like goals or whatever don't match up with my preferences, and like I'm not going to sign. But he's the first coach I offered a contract to that wasn't the one I offered like a 1-year deal to, who sounds like the Rangers or some crap. He signed his contract right away and whatever. So after he did that, I kind of went through our roster of NHL players who like I had their scheme fits written down. I kind of came up with, wrote their line scores down in the spreadsheet, or typed them up, the line score for what lines I would potentially fit them on for the spreadsheet. So then there were players who were either zeros or like in the negative that I trade. There's two big ones. 2 trades I made where I freed up a decent amount of cap space, which allowed me to make none other moves and whatnot. Is the first one was Cody Glass. I had signed to like a 2-year contract with like a $3 million or so AAV, but he did not. So then basically like the spot that was kind of available for him based on where I was putting other players based on their scheme fit was the third line, which as you can see here was like dump, shoot, bounce, balanced, and he was like either a 0 or I think he might have been -1. I think it was a -1. He was a -1 for the third line. So because he would have been a -1, I was like, all right, Cody Glass, you're out of here, friend. I'm sorry, but you got to get traded. You don't fit the scheme of this coach we were going to be rocking with for the rest of this franchise mode, pretty much, unless by some miracle There is actually a coach that gets generated at some point with a third pairing pitch cycle scheme fit for the third pair, which I doubt is going to ever happen, but you never know. But we're going to be rocking with this coach for the rest of French unless a miracle actually happens. I was like, alright, Cody Glass, you're gone, you're getting traded, and I did the find trade feature I kind of like to do, so the game kind of gives me like trades that I have to pick between rather than me trying to like cheese the trades and whatnot and get like better value than like what the player's really worth and whatnot. But for the Cody Glass, we traded him to the Columbus Blue Jackets, the President's Trophy winning team, for defenseman Jake Bean, who was an RFA they had qualified. I guess they couldn't afford or didn't want to pay. They couldn't agree to a contract with him. He's the left defenseman, offensive defenseman, so we'll kind of get to him in a second. And then 2 third-round picks, so that's a pretty good trade. Getting rid of our third line, our potential third line starting didn't fit the scheme anymore, who had a decent AAV, shipping him out, getting some picks along with it. And the other big one is because Jeremy Davies is going on the first pair, you kind of had then Roman Josi and Matthias Ekholm, who then would have had, between the two of them, would have to go on pair 2 and pair 3. And that's not really like a recipe potentially for long-term success in terms of like they're not going to want to stay there forever and they're not going to want to re-sign to a new contract, whichever one ends up on pair 3. Roman Josi is going to be on our second pair because that's balance, which kind of fits pretty much. And again, the worst you're probably going to get is you're going to get there is a 0 line score. Oh shoot, sorry, I dropped my controller. Where did I go? Oh, okay, we're good. Sorry about that. But Roman Josi, his kind of preferences are pinch and balance, so he's a +1 on second pairing. So he's going to go on the second pair with Dante Fabra, who's a balance. So he perfectly fits the second pair, so it's going to be a +3 line score on there, which is, I think, pretty good. Considering the max you can really get, it's like +4. So I'd say that's pretty decent. But then that kind of left Matthias Ekholm potentially fitting on the third pair, but he would have been, I think, a 0 or negative on the third pairing. So I was basically like, all right, you're old, you're kind of starting to decline a little bit in terms of overall and whatnot, and you have a massive cap hit of like $6 million per year. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to go. I tried to do the find trade feature with him. There was literally like no trades that came up at all. Like you can't find a trade, adjust your like what you're adding to the find trade feature and try again. So I was like, that sucks. I'm gonna have to try and make a trade of my own. So basically, what I did is I found a team who had him like in players interested. They wanted to trade him in with like the little green, like his text turned green, and that was the Carolina Hurricanes. And what I got in return was a 2nd round pick in 2025 and a 6th round pick in 2025 for Matthias Ekholm. So that freed up like between the two of them, that freed up like $9 million in cap space. So that left us with like $10 million or so in cap space to sign the players we need to sign, which after kind of figuring around with it, what I then needed was still needed a 3rd line left wing, a 3rd line center, a 3rd pairing right defenseman, backup goalie, and a 13th forward. So then what that kind of ended up turning into was, I think if I go to contracts here, I might just find the players. That'll make things easier to explain. Management, contracts. Let's look at left wingers. To fill that 3rd line left wing role, we signed Marcus Foligno to a 1-year, $2.3 million contract. Again, kind of what's going to happen now, because we kind of have a coach whose scheme we kind of know we want, we're going to stick with, is for this first season, these kind of players that are filling these holes for the most part, I signed them to 1-year contracts, because the scouting was for, which you can't really see here, but if I go to, let's go to like sign free agents here. You can see who's even available still. Blake Wheeler. All right, let's click on him here like this. And if you go to like his scouting thing here, as you can see, the Pro Scout Assessment is based on the old coach's scheme. So like you can't really tell. You have like really no idea, like at all, pretty much, unless you try to like match up that. Like because I did try to take a picture of like the old coach's scheme, because he was still available to be hired, and try to like match it up. But I was like, it's too much work, especially because we only have that. We only have like $10 million in cap space, which really wasn't a lot, to be honest. So I just kind of random players for him who were asking for low amounts of money. But so Marcus Foligno filled that 3rd line left wing role. 3rd line center, they went here with Adam Gaudette to like a 1 year, $1.075 million contract. That's what I mean. He's cheap. He's kind of not, because he's kind of traditional roles like depth forward. He isn't really that great, but he's kind of just going to do a job for this first season. Then 13th forward is some like random dude with like a 75 overall. He's probably in the system thing right now. And then kind of as you remember, I mentioned Jacob Bean earlier. He wanted like his ask was like almost $6 million. Was able to negotiate him down to a $5 million a year, 6-year contract. So he potentially will be our third pairing defenseman if he kind of fits with either like a +1 or a +2 potentially, which maybe he will. I don't really know exactly how that stuff works per se, but we'll see what he fits. If he doesn't fit, he'll basically get traded either at the trade deadline or at the end of the season, which then will free up much more cap space next offseason. Probably get us a decent player in return because he's a young defenseman, kind of cost controlled for like 5 years after that. We probably get us a decent return. And then our third pairing right defenseman is I signed Sean Walker to a 1-year, almost $3 million contract. And then kind of also with the Jake Bean situation, if Jake Bean doesn't fit the scheme at all, he's like a negative, like a -2. We do have kind of potentially again the system Libor Hayek and Kevin Ball, who are both waiver claims. And if one of the two of them kind of fits better, I'll slap them as our like third pairing left defenseman with Sean Walker, and then kind of go from there. And then one of the two of them will kind of stick around like on a more permanent basis if they happen to be a +1 or a +2. And the other one, along with Bean, will probably get traded at some point to some other team. But then kind of, as you said, last thing we needed was a backup goalie. And I think I got pretty much the steal of the market, I would say, in my humble opinion, is Hugo Alnfelt, who had a .920 save percentage in 67 games played in the Senators farm team and in the AHL. Actually, no, I think he was the Kings, right? Because Ontario Reign's the Kings, my bad. So he was the Kings AHL goalie. But he's an 81 overall, 23 years old, starter medium potential. Alright, so he basically replaced Connor Ingram with like a younger version of Connor Ingram. And had time to a 2-year, less than like a league minimum contract. So that's like great bargain value. Allow me to fit him under the cap and all that good stuff. While also basically giving Saros a pretty decent backup who could potentially stay for a long time here. He's an RFA at the expiry of his contract, so we could like qualify him, do whatever. So we have our kind of goaltending tandem in the future here. I'd say pretty much set up now, which is pretty good. And then kind of once again for the AHL, I like signed a bunch of like random really low overall players to fit in kind of whatever gaps in the lineup I had there. But kind of that's kind of it in terms of like the moves and whatnot we made. I like hired a couple new scouts, because a couple C-rated scouts. Contracts expired to hire some new scouts to replace them. As like you kind of saw here, as the entire NHL coaching staff contracts were expired, hired like whole new set of coaches for the NHL, who I think will create a pretty decent A-, B-, C. D- I think is pretty good, I'd say. So we have a good front on our coaching staff pretty much set up for a while. We have scouts. We have a kind of roster set up where if I can preview it for you now. In terms of our first line, our line score is a +7 with Eli Tolvanen, Matt Duchene, and Philip Tomasino rocking on the first line. Excuse me, sorry. Line 2 is a +4, which I would kind of want to improve upon, but we'll see what happens and whatnot in the future. That is Philip Forsberg with a +2 line score, and then Ryan Johansson and Granlund with a +1 each. So the two of them potentially will get moved on, but at some point we'll see. Then the third line is, we don't really know what the score is going to be because it's two brand new players. It's Marcus Foligno, Gaudette, and then Luke Cunnin, who's a 0. So again, he's probably one we're going to move on at some point. But I'd rather kind of stick with what I know and have a 0 there for now, at least for this upcoming season. Then kind of trade him out, bring in someone in who then is like a -. So kind of staying for the next season. So we don't really know what their score is going to be, but it's around kind of probably, if we're lucky, a positive. Probably like we're potentially a 0 or a negative. And then our fourth line is a +7 line score also, which is pretty great. And that's a prospect who's been who's in the system from the beginning, whose name is, where'd it go? Igor Afanaseyev. He's a 76 overall, but he was a +3 lines fit score. So I was like, all right, I'll chuck him in here. especially because like Ben Davis. Let's think of the Tottenham quest right now. Jeremy Davies is 76 overall, so that's kind of them based on that, like probably like the minimum overall allow like in the NHL roster, because if he's going to be there, why can't I give like a 76 overall prospect a shot? Kind of is the logic there. So he's going to be our third line, our fourth line left wing. Fourth line center is Snosis himself, Colton Sissons. He has a +2 line score on the fourth line, so that's good. And then fourth line right wing is another prospect, Luke Evangelista, with a +2 line score to make the +7. Our first pair is Jeremy Davies with +2, Carrier with a +1, makes a +3. Pairing 2, Yosti with a +1, Faber with a +2, makes a +3. And the third pairing is one of Jake Bean, Lieber Hayek, or Kevin Ball with Sean Walker, which could be anything, who knows, because the scheme fit for that was like what, hold line and cycle. The cycle part is probably fine in the general sense that like I think a lot of players have cycle as part of their thing, or balance. So the problem, the whole line will make things very interesting. Just because from what I understood, hopefully we don't necessarily get to that point, but from again when I was kind of doing research, when I was thinking potentially kind of calling this a failure and ending the series here, is that from what I understand, because EA is stupid and doesn't know what they're doing, like generated prospects, it's like this, like so like the 2 computer generated players we drafted like with our 7th round picks, 2 defensemen. It's literally apparently like impossible, at least in NHL 22. Maybe it's changed since then, but I doubt it has, to be honest. It's literally impossible for them to have hold line as a preference. They're either balanced or pinch. So kind of down the road, if we get to that point, it takes us that long to win the Stanley Cup. Hopefully it doesn't, so we don't have to get to that point. It's gonna be like very, very difficult to find players who fit that kind of scheme fit. So we'll see. We'll cross the bridge when we get to it, but hopefully we won't get to that point, because maybe even next season, because our line scores are pretty solid, I'd say, and our roster is pretty stacked in terms of overalls and whatnot. Hopefully we can win the Stanley Cup next season and whatnot, but kind of in terms of our expectations for next season, because it's not like the roster's not completely molded to the coach's scheme and whatnot, I'm not going to boldly predict we're going to win the Stanley Cup with 100% guaranteed. What I would say is I'd imagine we should make the playoffs, and hopefully we should, I'd say I'm guaranteed we should, in all likelihood, unless like the sim goes absolutely like bonkers sideways terrible, with line scores of +7, +4, whatever, +7, +3s, we should have no problems making the playoffs, and hopefully finishing in like a, well, I guess technically because we're like a lot of our rivals, it's the away games, we kind of want to finish in like a wild cardy spot, because that they'll give us like an advantage if we match up against like the Blues or the the Sabres, the Coyotes, or the Canucks in the playoffs. But I guess in the same vein, St. Louis and San Jose are both their kind of rival moments. It's home games for this, so it's kind of mixed. It's 50-50, but we'll kind of see what happens. We should make the playoffs, hopefully. Hopefully we should make the playoffs with the roster as it's currently constructed. Maybe win the Stanley Cup, and again, probably be doing some trading of defensemen either at the start of the season or at the trade deadline and whatnot. But hopefully fingers crossed, this season will be our best one and we'll win the Stanley Cup, hopefully. But I do have high expectations for next season. We'll kind of see what happens, but that's kind of it for now. So kind of the next episode of the video or whatever in this series will be a recap of the 2024-2025 season. But that's kind of it for now. Thank you if anyone want to watch this. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you'll consider watching the next video as well. Thank you.